देख देख क्या बना क्या बना है फिर मैं उसको सेंड कर दूंगा
अरे मैंने तो काम मैं चेक करने थे तुम so circulatory system कहाँ तक पहुँचे blood clotting in a test tube no that is not blood clotting blood groups
And you were giving a question.
from RH system RH only that क्या हो गया
मैंने कुछ नहीं करा
तुम कुछ करते नहीं हो तो ये तो सबसे बड़ा वरी है कि तुमको अभी कुछ तो करने का हाई टाइम है हाँ तुम कुछ कर ही नहीं रहे हो करते रहे हो बदमाशी कर रहे हो और क्या कुछ नहीं किया चलो take 10 questions अरे most of the time we learn online from this chapter all huh from ICSE no today I have got 2 lectures I'm very happy you know why because 10 minutes I'm going to take oral revision now no at the end last 10 minutes otherwise you get all mixed up and of course I'm coming from CU so तुमको यहाँ से नॉलेज ऊपर करने से तुमको आना you are saying तो हाँ
इतना ट्रैवल किया आप खुद की सेहत
इतना ट्रैवल किया
खुद की सेहत
you are thinking too much of your health and see your structure and see my structure खाते पीते सोते घर के हो तुम you take too much of rest then whatever you work chalo now what I said the last topic that we were discussing was blood groups no last topic that we were discussing was blood groups and now we are going to complete with that then I give you 10 questions on this part of the chapter and then I'm going to start with the next section of the chapter the structure function of the human heart and the last 10 minutes I want to take a revision oral revision on the chapters that you have for your exam this coming exam okay so let us finish with this part blood groups we are almost done actually the 4 main blood groups we are already done but along with blood groups now that we are talking about A plus and B A positive and B negative and A positive O positive what is the meaning of this when we are talking about O positive and A negative it only refers to along with the antigens present on the RBC surface so here I am talking about that I other day told you that whenever I'm talking about the plasma has got a variety of proteins, no? And one of the most important proteins that we have to understand is the antibodies. So that with that reference, the other day also we said which type of antibody is actually present in the plasma referring to the blood group A. When I talk about blood group A, the antibody that is present in the plasma is anti-B. And if I talk about which type of antigens are present in the blood group of a person with blood group AB, the antigens are A and B. And if I have to talk about what type of antigens are present or what type of antibodies are present in a person with blood group O, you are supposed to write anti-A and anti-B both. So these are the typical concepts that we have already understood. Now let us try understanding that if I talk about the surface of a RBC, I now talk about the RBC cell. Now this RBC cell, we are going to come across that this RBC cell is supposed to have 2 types of antigens. It is supposed to have 2 types of antigens. And then I talk about something more there. Then what I'm trying to understand is this is the rhesus antigen and this is the antigen A. On the RBC, what is this now?
cheat.
Huh? शायद को ये सारे चीज याद पता होता है
हम साइन करने के लिए ना।
2
हाँ।
क्लास तुम्हारे क्लास में नहीं है क्लास में कैसा है बोलते नहीं उसको बहुत शांत है इसको खाने के लिए खोलते आराम करने के लिए जाता है शायद बिना
हमें 2 बार प्रारंभ बताएंगे 11 क्लास से 2 बार 2 क्लास एक्सपीरियंस है भाई इसका
लोग कुछ बोलते हैं उसको मानना चाहिए
अरे मैम 2 बार प्रारंभ पता नहीं
कभी ये सोचा है
झूठ बोल रहे हैं
in case you are not able to do good in forget about good in case you are not able to go through the papers क्या हो सकता है करूंगा मतलब क्या अगर तो 50% भी लाए 60% भी लाए is it of any you are giving more stress to your parents तुमको ना तो the school will also not keep you with that percentage आगे चलेंगे अगर ये सब तुमने कभी सोचा नहीं है तो प्लीज सोचो all these big schools they don't even keep their own children if the percentage is low वो पहले सोचो एक बार कि उसके बाद अभी तो 10th में तो हूँ मैं कहीं ना कहीं तो हूँ इसके बाद क्या करोगे 10th 11th में कहाँ जाओगे एक पार्टिकुलर परसेंटेज जिसके अभाव अगर नहीं आया तुम्हारे खुद के स्कूल तुमको नहीं रखने वाला है think about that so when we are talking about RBC cell it has got 2 different type of antigens so it has got many types now with this reference we are talking about 2 types of antigens one is the blood group antigen and the other is the rhesus antigen so when we are talking about the blood group antigen it will decide the compatibility between the antigen on the RBC surface and the antibody in the plasma. But now that I talk about this rhesus antigen, here also should we decide, should we think about any type of compatibility between the antigen and the antibody? Yes. This rhesus antigen, अब rhesus antigen और antibody A और B का कोई relation नहीं है. No, they don't have any compatibility or incompatibility to be checked. But yes, when I talk about the rhesus antigen, it is also able to undergo the process of or this rhesus antigen can also trigger the formation of antigens or antibody in any other foreign cell. Something like I talk about that this person who has got RH, now that I understand that this RH antigen is there in a person's RBC, then this person we are going to talk about as A positive. I talk about another individual and in his RBCs, now that I talk about another individual, unke RBC mein only this type of A blood group antigens are there and the rhesus antigens are not there. So we will designate this person as A negative. So abhi kya hoga hai? This person who is RH positive, when gives blood to this person, is it safe enough? Not exactly, because ये जो antigen है, the moment enters into the body of the recipient, these antigens are acting as a foreign antigen and will trigger the formation of the corresponding antibody. I repeat, this is a donor now, no? This is a donor now. And this is a recipient now. So now that I talk about the donor and the recipient, now we try understanding that this antigen when enters into this does not have the same antigen, so this is considered as a foreign antigen. Now this foreign antigen enters into the body of the recipient, यहाँ पे antibody form होने लग जाता है. Antigens always trigger the formation of antibodies. तो यहाँ पे antibody form होने लग जाता है, and then first occasion में, even if it is safer, in the subsequent occasion, if I keep on giving this for 2-3 times, what will happen? Adequate amount of antibody भी बन रहा है and adequate amount of antigen भी आ गया है. This will result in clumping of the blood, coagulation of the blood. This is the same concept again, as I said. If I talk about a woman, say suppose I talk about a woman and this woman has conceived. This woman is actually what? This woman is RH positive. This woman is Rh positive. Now, if this woman is Rh positive and she happens to conceive a Rh negative fetus, because the father may be Rh negative. Any of these situations, you may get a question, try to understand the logic. When I'm talking about that the mother is Rh positive, the fetus is Rh negative, is it a safe situation actually? Not actually, because by the way of the placenta, the antibodies and the antigen, they can diffuse, number one. So now, if this, by the way of the placenta diffusion I'm talking about, remember, there will be no direct contact of the blood between the mother and the fetus. So we have to only understand the diffusion by the way of the placental walls. So ye antigen, whenever it enters into the body of this individual, this is what is called sensitization. And then this will result in the formation of more antibodies. Yes, this way movement will also happen, no? Antibody movement will also happen, but this is not that risky. Antibody कभी भी antigen नहीं बना सकता, but antigen antibody formation को trigger करता है. So this way movement is even more risky. तो इसमें क्या हो रहा है? This antigens entering here, triggering the formation of antibody even more. But as I said, with this concept, जब हम first time transfusion करेंगे, the first transfusion may not be that risky क्योंकि antibody amount and antigen is not the same. तो antibody थोड़ा है, antigen ज़्यादा है, antigen थोड़ा है, antibody ज़्यादा है, clumping effective नहीं होता. Equal quantity of antigen and antibody है, effective clumping होता है. Understood? So now I said, इसीलिए that is the concept that they understand. If first time transfusion हुआ, so it is risky, but not that much. But second time, third time, of course, yes. क्योंकि that at the time already small amount of antibody तो है ही, blood में antibody they don't get washed away or excreted. वो blood में antibody रहेगा for a long time. Even more antigen entering, even more antigen entering. So a particular time comes when the antigen and the antibody quantity is more or less the same, and the process of clumping starts. The same thing is happening if the mother is Rh positive, the fetus is Rh negative. First pregnancy, comparatively अगर safe भी हो गया, the second and the third is high risk. So whenever, that's the reason now, of course, today whenever we are talking about, is this situation happening? हाँ, हम काफी लोगों के साथ ये होता है, where the mother is Rh positive, the mother is Rh negative, and she may have conceived a Rh positive fetus. Then what to do? Of course, today in medical science, that's not too much to be worried about, because the entire 9 months the woman has to be on anticoagulants. Doses and injections of anticoagulant दिया जाता है, so that there is no risk of coagulation. Because if there is coagulation, this fetus, any moment it can start, it can stop its process of growth, because the process of diffusion and growth will stop, and this will get converted into a stillbirth. Stillbirth. And if not stillbirth, quite a number of times, in initial stages, may after 2 months, 3 months, abortion ho jata hai, normally also. So there are many, many complications to talk about. This little bit more we'll talk about in that chapter of introduction. So अभी फिलहाल ये खाली समझना है कि what is the problem when we are talking about transfusion between Rh positive and Rh negative blood? Rh positive blood entering into Rh negative body means introduction of foreign antigens, and the antigens always trigger the formation of antibody. And the respective antigen and antibody, when it comes together, it will result in clumping. And that is what also you had come across. If you talk about antigen A, should it come together with antibody A? No, then there is clumping. So हमारे body में anti-A नहीं होता है for people who are with antigen A. हमारे body में normally anti-B होता है. And people who are with antigen B on the surface of the RBC, what type of antibodies do they have? Anti-A they have. And blood group AB and blood group O, the concept you have to remember. Any doubt regarding this? So यहाँ पे तुम्हें क्या पढ़ना है? Basically 4 blood groups, their compatibility, and to reason out also. Sometimes you get questions also to say that a person with blood group AB or a person with blood group A cannot give blood to a person with blood group B, or a person with blood group AB cannot give blood to a person with blood group A, but a person with blood group A can give blood to A. What I told you just now, I talk about A and I talk about AB. Is this safe enough? Is this safe enough? Can a person with A give blood to AB? Yes. Comparatively. But can I say that this is safe enough? No, because दो तरह के antigen entering into this individual's body is quite risky. क्योंकि इसके body में already anti-B antibody है, और जब ये जा रहा है, then anti-A antibody भी बन रहा है, then effective clogging हो सकता है. But antigen only one time entry, इसके पास already दो तरह के antigens है, antibody कोई नहीं, and थोड़ा सा antibody will not create much of a problem. This group of people are known as universal recipients. So you get questions this way. Why are people with AB known as universal recipients? Why are people with O known as donors? And can a person with A give blood to AB and vice versa like that? Okay. So this type of questions you have to understand. So ये हो गया blood group का concept, and already we have been talking about RH and the AB blood groups. Coagulation already we have studied. Take some questions now. Let us complete with this part first, and then I have to move on to the next part so that by tomorrow we should be done with this chapter mostly. The first question. Name the vitamin responsible for the process of clotting. Or name the following. Only I'll give it 10 names the following. Basic concepts. Name the following. Number one, the vitamin responsible for blood clotting. Vitamin responsible for blood clotting. Vitamin responsible for blood clotting. Number two. Keep one line gap in between, you will write down the answers. Number two. The fluid present at the site of injury after formation of soft clot. Number three. Soft clot. You get this question also in a different way. Huh? The same answer, but question do hota hai. Another question, I will just give you a clue. Plasma from which hydrogen is removed. The same question. Plasma from which hydrogen is removed. ये भी answer same है. Number three. The enzyme released by injured platelets. Enzyme released by injured platelets. Number four. WBCs, which are three-lobed and phagocytic. WBCs, which are three-lobed and phagocytic. Four. Phagocytic. Four. Number four. Five. Now, number five. Site of origin of RBCs in an embryo. Site of origin of RBCs in an embryo. Site of origin of RBCs in an embryo. 6. Origin of RBCs in an embryo. 6. Abnormal decrease of WBCs, abnormal decrease of WBC count. Abnormal decrease of WBC count. Next. Abnormal decrease एक ही है नहीं, abnormal decrease एक है, abnormal increase एक है. Abnormal decrease of WBC count. What is the condition of abnormal decrease? एक ही है. अच्छा, तो clarify कर जाता है. Next is number 7. Number 7. Number 7. I think this answer we can only. There also give you some questions. Next is you write the mineral element necessary for activation of growth tropic. Mineral element activation necessary for activation of growth tropic. Mineral element necessary for activation of growth tropic. 7, 8. Composition of hard clot. Composition of hard clot. Composition of hard clot. 9. 9. 9. Defense chemicals released by WBCs. Defense chemicals released by WBCs. 3 you will write here, huh? Actually 3 names will come here. Next, proteins or plasma proteins necessary for blood clotting. Plasma protein necessary for blood clotting. Next. Then already
unnecessary for
blood clotting. Last one. Squeezing out of WBCs at the site of injury. Squeezing out of WBCs through capillary wall at the site of injury. Squeezing out of WBCs through capillary wall at the site of injury. Just 5 minutes, huh? This is another name. But you should know all of this basic concept right here. You don't have to write anything more than a book. Click on first. Nobody's online. Nobody's online. Charlie's online.
coming out of WBC to capillary walls at the site of injury.
हाँ करो हाँ क्या हो गया AC ऑफ अच्छा when he comes you tell him चलो फास्ट Oh no, Just 2 more minutes and I will ask you. जल्दी करना है. This chapter is over, no school में. Not yet.
It's chanted.
हम स्कूल में भी कुछ क्रोमोसोम चल रहा है
अच्छा सेल डिवीजन पहले हो गया था क्रोमोसोम नहीं हुआ था when we had done cell division here then you said it's done it you said structure of chromosome एक part है cell division is another part हाँ but I think तुम लोगों ने बोला था चलो चलो चला ना आज start asking हाँ इसका तो पता चलता है 20 kg इसका वेट है तुम्हारा तो नहीं है ना तुम्हारा कौन स्मार्ट बॉय तुमको हाँ बुक से नहीं उठा पाओगे हाँ कैसे पढ़ोगे कैरियर सा ये रिमोट भेजो टाइप का हाँ ये देख क्यों boys are hot in this class girls are टेम्परेचर कम कर थोड़ा बढ़ाते चलेगा देखो टेम्परेचर कितने मैंने 20 को कर दो नहीं हो गया ना हो गया डिस्कशन आंसर कितना मिला बोलो 3 I think 5 minutes should be enough to solve this. 5 हमारे प्रोटीन पर टीचर याद नहीं आ रहा कितने ऋषा कितना चलो आए साथ साथ which are the reactions chalo next
The fluid
present at the site I said this is a question I gave you a long one answer plasma from which hydrogen is removed I told you also that next does my class pass plastic from kinase factor X plastic या तो thrombokinase factor है बेटा instead of factor can you write thrombokinase या thromboplastic these are terms you should write in the paper thromboplastic thrombokinase any one of these you can write come next WBC relobed and phagocytic so दूसरा I gave you this question also two WBCs which are phagocytic neutrophils and monocytes. No, but I already mentioned in the question three lobe. Monocyte three lobe नहीं होता. Phagocytic and three lobe neutrophils. Neutrophils. Next.
Cytogenesis of IDC and everything. Long bones are all over the world.
Embryo. Embryo में bones कहाँ से आएगा? What bones?
Liver and skin.
Liver. वो भी partially organized liver रहता है. Long bones कहाँ से? Embryo में long bones कहाँ से? ठीक ना? और bones long bones वो children में होता है. Children. Next, actually
Abnormal decrease of WBC count.
abnormal decrease, lymphopenia. Next.
Remain necessary for activation of prothrombin, calcium.
Calcium.
वही वाले लिखा था
मतलब वो भी वाला खाली लिखा था.
नहीं मैं बाकी बोल जो भी लोगों ने बोला वो लिखा था मैं वो 8 के बाद करने बाकी लिखा ना पहले से लिखा था
मैंने भी इसके बाद नहीं लिखा है.
Next. Krisha, next.
आप यहाँ से शुरू करते तो मैं मान जाता
Composition of heart clot, fibrin network and dead RBCs. What RBCs? Fibrin network, dead RBCs. Fibrin network and dead RBCs. Here है basic composition of the heart clot. That's the last one.
Depends on the chemicals released by
WBC. Actually, there are three chemicals that will be launched. What are those? Antibodies, antitoxins, and histamine. Histamine. Antibodies and antitoxins also, if you write, that's more than enough for you. If you can remember to write, the other day we learned eosinophils, basophils, and lymphocytes. Three types of cells. Check the table, that table you have to learn. That
Antibodies, antitoxin.
antitoxins, antibodies, and histamine for histamine. So eosinophil releases one type, basophils releases one type, and lymphocytes releases one type. Three types of chemicals, and neutrophils and monocytes they are phagocytes. तो ये हो गया 5 तरह का WBC. Defense mechanisms are different. ठीक है? Done? More to add. क्या है? Next. Proteins necessary for blood clotting. Which protein is necessary for blood clotting? No, protein type में protein. Plasma protein I must say something. Plasma protein necessary for blood. Plasma protein necessary for blood clotting. So when we are talking about plasma protein, वैसे तो बहुत सारे proteins हैं, but now majorly पूछ रहे हैं fibrinogen. Plasma protein वैसे तो prothrombin भी है, fibrinogen भी है, but mostly fibrinogen का पूछ रहे हैं. Next, क्या है last? Squeezing out of coverage. That I don't know what diabetes. This is a very common question you get in the paper. Keep going through this. Next class I will again give you some more questions. Next is we now start discussing the structure of the heart. The structure of the heart to study. Now, the structure of the human heart that we are going to talk about. What is the heart made up of? The heart is made up of cardiac muscles. The heart is made up of cardiac muscles. Can you tell me one feature about the cardiac muscles? Huh? So now that we are talking about the cardiac muscles, one special property of the cardiac muscles, they don't undergo fatigue. They never undergo tired, they never get tired because their special property is they undergo rhythmic contraction and relaxation. Rhythmic contraction and relaxation. So now that we are talking about what is the heart made up of. Next is the covering. When we are talking about the covering of the heart, the external protective tissue that covers the heart, what is it known as? It is known as pericardium. It is known as pericardium. What is pericardium made up of? It's a epithelial tissue, protective tissue, and this pericardium generally protects the muscular structure as well. What is the major function of the heart? Pumping of the blood. The major function of the blood, major function of the heart is what? It is a reservoir of blood and helps in the pumping of the blood, pumping organ. What is its location if you have to talk about? Where is the heart located? Location of the heart to understand?
Behind the sternum.
In the chest cavity, behind the sternum, between the lungs. No? So when we are talking about the basic location to understand that it is in the chest cavity and between the lungs. Chest cavity between the lungs. So that is its location. And this, when we are talking about the size of the heart, the size of our fist. The size of our heart is the size of our fist to understand. So these are some of the basic information. Now we try understanding that when we are talking about the covering, okay, something more also to understand. No, when I'm talking about the covering, I said the coverings can be of two types. I had been firstly mentioning about the fibrous or the membranous cover. Okay, the membranous cover. You may also say membranous cover of the heart is one. Membranous cover of the heart is one as a pericardium. What is the bony cover? When we talk about the bony cover, it's the rib cage. The rib cage. The bony cover of the heart is the rib cage to understand. Yes, as we talk about the pericardial fluid, this pericardium is actually made up of two layers, no? The outer visceral and the inner visceral and the outer parietal layer. Same like what I'm giving code. I put it off then. Put it off. So when we are talking about the structure of the heart now, I say, what is the special feature about the heart that we understand? The heart is four chamber. Now that we are talking about the mammalian heart, now I'm so happy. We like starting. Huh? तो फैन तो चालू करो So now that we are talking about the structure of the heart, human heart is four chamber heart, no mammalian heart that we are talking about. Can you see this? दिखाई दे रहा है? So now that we are दिखाई दे रहा है last that side? Tanmay also. So now that we are talking about the structure of the heart, it is a four-chambered heart that we understand. We are going to first of all understand what is the significance of the four-chambered heart. Significance of the four-chambered heart. First of all, you are supposed to always write this way, that the right side and the left side of the heart that we understand always has got two different types of blood which never gets mixed. The right side of the heart is always supposed to carry impure blood, deoxygenated blood, and the left side is always supposed to contain oxygenated blood, rather pure blood that we call it as. And why does not it mix is it has got such type of muscular walls known as septum. It has got such type of muscular walls here also, and here also, all over. So ultimately the four chambers remain completely separated. There is no seeping of the blood, mixing of the blood ever, and there are separate inlet and outlet of the blood from every distinct chamber. Okay, then what is the significance that you are always asked? What is the significance of a four-chambered heart? Now that we are saying that the pure and the impure blood never gets made, then what is the significance? What is the benefit that we are enjoying? We complex group of organisms are always in a need of high supply of oxygen to our tissues, and this structure of the heart can give us the maximum supply of oxygen to our tissues, because if I talk about in a comparative manner, the heart of the fishes, the heart of the amphibians, say suppose when I talk about the heart of the fishes, they basically have got a lower chamber, one single chamber, and upper chamber. So when I talk about the heart of the fishes, there is only one single auricle and one single ventricle. What is an auricle? It is known as the upper chamber of the heart. Auricles, upper chamber of the heart. What are ventricles? The lower chambers of the heart. So यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है? Every time when the blood is entering and the impure blood is entering and getting mixed, it is coming down to the upper chamber, then to the lower chamber. So the blood is constantly getting mixed. You know, there is no separation as such. And then the blood will again go out, and the blood again, the impure blood comes in. So since there are only two chambers, small amount of blood is as it is there in the heart always, and the impure blood comes in, and from there only the blood goes out, goes to the tissues. So the supply of the oxygen to the tissues is much lesser as in comparison with us. Again, if I have to talk about the amphibian heart, in case of the amphibian heart, which has got two upper chambers, never mind, but the lower chamber is still common. So when the blood is entering this way, and if I say that this is the impure blood, and yes, the mixing is very much happening here, and if I say that this is the pure blood entering, never mind, even if the entry of impure and pure blood is different, but in this lower chamber, they are always getting mixed, and then again, they get out of the body. But these problems are solved in our structure and roughly also in the structures of the bird or the avian hearts, because we have got separate inlet and outlet tubes, which are known as blood vessels. So we're going to learn that now in detail, that what are the basic structures, parts of the heart. First of all, we start with the chambers of the heart. Let us learn about the chambers. What are the chambers and their functions and their comparison? First, I talk about the chambers of the heart. What are the upper chambers known as? The upper chambers are known as the auricles. The upper chambers are known as the auricles, and we are going to talk about that the lower chambers would be termed as ventricles. We try to make a comparative account of what are the auricles, their walls, their structures, features, functions. First of all, when I talk about the auricles, let us try to understand that if I am talking about the auricles, what is the basic function of the auricles? What do? The auricles always receive blood. They are always receiving blood. Auricles always receive blood. In comparison, if I have to write about the ventricles, what are the ventricles doing? The ventricles generally give away blood. Ventricles always give away blood. So in a comparative account, always you have to understand, yes, it is the auricles which are receiving blood. The auricles are always receiving blood. The auricles are always receiving blood. But now there's a difference. If I have to talk about the right auricle, let us start with the specific terms. I talk about the right auricle. What is the right auricle receiving? The right auricle receiving deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood, and by the way of vena cava. By the way of vena cava. Let us learn. What is vena cava? Vena cava are the big veins of the body. This ones. Vena cava are the big veins of the body now that I talk about. So I here mentioned the first point, very important for you to understand. The right auricle receives what type of blood? Deoxygenated. Now, what is the meaning of this word deoxygenated blood? Now, then again, I have to talk about, if I complete the next point, then I should write that the left auricle, what does it receive? It receives oxygenated blood. It receives oxygenated blood, but by the way of pulmonary veins now. By the way of pulmonary veins. So यहाँ पे ये सारे जो information है, these all specifically you'll have to remember. So now I talk about a major difference between these two words. Oxygenated and deoxygenated blood का difference क्या है? Oxygenated blood, what do you have to understand? Should I say that the oxygenated blood has 98% oxygen and 2% carbon dioxide? No. Always remember, this is not wrong. This is not correct. When I talk about oxygenated blood, it is something roughly around, it may have something around, say, 65% oxygen and something around 50% or 45% carbon dioxide, like that. The difference is not a big difference, remember. You may get statements like this, true, false, where you are asked to take that the oxygenated blood contains 98% oxygen and 2% carbon dioxide. No, that is never happening in our body that way. If I talk about deoxygenated blood also, it may just have a difference of at the most 10-15%, at the most maximum. Sharp difference nahi hoga. The difference is, if I talk about oxygenated blood, I should understand that if it is 60% oxygen, then 40% carbon dioxide. Deoxygenated, if it is 60% carbon dioxide, then roughly around 38-40% oxygen. मतलब एक concentration of carbon dioxide थोड़ा सा high, oxygen थोड़ा सा low. That is what the concept is. So if you are asked to write down the definition of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, then what are you supposed to write? Generally, students quite a number of times they would write down the definition this way. Oxygenated blood means blood rich in oxygen. Deoxygenated blood, blood rich in carbon dioxide. That's not a very proper definition to write. Oxygenated blood, blood which has a higher concentration of oxygen as compared to carbon dioxide. Deoxygenated blood, blood which has a higher concentration of carbon dioxide as compared to oxygen. Again, to remember, वो ratio जो है, वो either 60-40 रहता है या 55-45 रहता है, something like that. And read out the definitions to remember next time also when you are writing down this answer. Define the terms oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Define the terms oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Notebook में लिखो. Define the terms oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Define the terms oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. देखो oxygenated. Oxygenated blood. Blood which has oxygenated blood. Under that you write blood which has a higher concentration of oxygen. Blood which has a higher concentration of oxygen and a lower concentration of carbon dioxide. Blood which has a higher concentration of oxygen and a lower concentration of carbon dioxide. Deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood, blood which has higher concentration of carbon dioxide, and a lower concentration of blood which has higher concentration of carbon dioxide and a lower concentration of oxygen and a lower concentration of oxygen. ये तुमको क्यों चाहिए? ये बोल रहा है ऑन करो, ये बोलता है बंद करो. अभी मैं क्या करूँगा? हाँ, मुझे ना. कम हुआ ना? हमारी कैसे? Did you write that? So now, what did we learn so far? We are talking about the auricles, and I said just now that if it is the right auricle, always to associate right auricle के साथ deoxygenated blood, and if it is the left auricle के साथ oxygenated blood. Is that okay? So now, when we are talking about this first feature that I said, the right auricle receives what type of blood? Now I am talking about that the right auricle receives blood by the way of vena cava. Then what is the meaning of the word vena cava? Definition of vena cava क्या है? Vena cava are the broad veins of the body. The broad veins of the body, meaning when I talk about the veins which are coming from any tissue, let me just say this way. I'm talking about the veins coming from the stomach, the veins coming from the intestine, the veins coming from the legs, the veins coming from the bones. They all will unite in this certain formation of some big broad veins. So these veins, 5 minutes crossing number. अरे तुम जो कर रहे हो मैं भी तो कर सकती समझते हो तुम लोग
क्या किया मैम?
और तुम सोचो तुम क्या कर
इसने ड्राइंग किया था हाथ में बिठा रहा था।
अरे ये तो लड़कियों करती है हाथ में
मैं कहाँ इसने किया था?
तुम जो कर रहे हो कि मैं भी कभी करती हूँ Now, when we are talking about this, what I said that when we are trying to first of all understand what is the Vena cava, how is it formed? It is already formed the fusion of many veins, collection of many veins. What is a Vena cava? The big broad vein of the body. So, if I talk about the big broad vein of the body, there are two big broad veins of our body. Which are those? One is the broad vein coming from the upper region of the body, and one is the broad vein coming from the lower region of the body. So if I have to talk about these veins, I'll talk about later when I talk about vessels. But abhi filhal ye samjho, whenever I'm talking about the upper vena cava, which is also known as the superior vena cava, and the inferior, whether they are coming from the upper region of the body or the lower region of the body, they will always empty the deoxygenated blood into the right auricle. Whether I talk about the vein coming from the lower part or I talk about the vein coming from the upper part, meaning I may understand the veins of the head region, of the facial region, of the neck region, shoulder, arms, all unite together to form a big broad vein, but it will empty the blood into the right auricle only. Pulmonary vein are veins coming only from the lungs. So the right auricle will receive blood from the lungs. Statement is true or false? I repeat. Now, when I talk about, I say, right auricle receives blood by the way of the veins, vena cava, and left auricle receives blood by the way of the pulmonary vein. I talked about a statement right now when I say, right ventricle receives blood from the lungs. Right ventricle receives blood not from the lungs but from the rest of the body by the way of vena cava. What is it? Have you told me? I said ventricle. I'm sorry. So right auricle receives blood from all parts of the body but not the lungs. And left auricle receives blood only from the lungs. Am I understood now? So this is a basic difference that you have to understand between the right and the left auricle. So right auricle, if I talk about, it will receive blood from all parts of the body but not from the lungs. And the left auricle will receive blood only from the lungs by the way of the pulmonary veins. What else you were supposed to understand so far? We talk about the auricles, the wall thickness. Now when I'm talking about the wall of the auricles are as it is thin to understand. When I talk about the walls of the auricles, they are comparatively thin. We generally cannot differentiate so very remarkably between the two walls of the right and the left auricle. They are almost the same. But when I have to talk about the right and the left, now there's something that we'll have to talk about later. So when I talk about the wall of the auricles, they are thin. What does that signify, or what are you supposed to understand from this? The wall is thin because the force of contraction is very less, mild. The force of contraction is mild. Force of contraction mild क्यों है? Because they don't have to push the blood to a very far off distance. They only have to push the blood to the next part. That is the ventricle. The right auricle will push the blood into the right ventricle. The left auricle will push the blood into the left ventricle. That much only. And something more to understand is what is the meaning of the inter-auricular septum? Inter-auricular septum. What do you understand by this?
That divides the right auricle from the left.
Very good.
Right ventricle.
So whenever I'm talking about septum, you understand it's a wall, muscular wall it is, and this muscular wall is like we go further. So now, when we are talking about that this interauricular septum, what is the location between the two auricles? What is it preventing? What is the function of the interauricular septum? Separate the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood. So the right auricle contains oxygenated, deoxygenated. Left auricle contains oxygenated. Now, next is we are going to find out a basic difference between the auricles and the ventricles. Take a break, breathe, and then go out, come back sharp after 5 minutes. We will continue.
10 minutes.
Break 10 minutes वो याद रहता है और लेक्चर 2 मिनट अगर ज्यादा हो जाता है तो you start feeling restless.
बिल बना रहा मैं हाथ से मीटर होकर बोलता हूँ अधिकार क्या होगा अरे यहाँ पे कहाँ गाड़ी बनता है कौन अपन छूटे यहाँ पे ऐसे ऐसे कर आया नहीं जरा अबे अरे क्या
अभी 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 महिमा सना आए हैं लेकिन वो साढ़े 7 बजे जाएगा
हमें हमें दो समोसा का मेरी तरफ से
बस 2 3 चाहिए
अरे हाँ एक किसके लिए कितने आदमी मार के लेके जा
एक में ना रही शेंदु कुमार
देखो पिछला में बिठा के रखा है
हां देखा भाई इतनी मार के देते हैं
अबे कर देगी अरे भाई अरे वो किसने छोड़ा भाई अरे मारी कौन है अरे माइक कहते माइक अबे इस स्पीड पे चले जाएंगे नहीं पे गाली इस रिपोर्ट के सारे पेंडिंग केसेस खत्म मैं तो अरे क्या कुत्ते मांग रहे हैं अरे क्या देखा है पूरा मुझे देखना है देखा भाई मैं तो देख तो 2-3 कर लिए इसको ज्यादा पार्ट में से नहीं पता जब पहले सीजन इसको ये बात है अभी हम आर्टिस्ट को बाबा है मतलब बाबा है सिंगली मार देखा एक साथ तीन के साथ में ना बहुत ऑडियो सेटिंग चीज करेंगे एक बनाना अबे उनका ऑलरेडी कॉलिंग है आर्टिकल भाई ये बोली होता है बहुत मजा आता है माइको बता दे इस मंदिर के बाद कि ऑस्ट्रेलिया न्यूजीलैंड भी ऑस्ट्रेलिया न्यूजीलैंड भी बोलते ना वो लास्ट पिछले वीडियो में ना एकदम इंडिया तो यूपी भी इंडिया के पास प्रेसिडेंट स्ट्रॉन्ग तीसरी टीम practice just
अगर चीज एक बार से लोग पेज में कॉल करके आते तो बस इतना खतरनाक है बंदे ने तीन बार डाला तीनों बोल देते हैं जो टेस्ट का फिर हाथ से करना पड़ेगा तो सो जो मैंने आगे आप लोगों के साथ प्लीज इसके सवेरे बैठ कर देखेंगे क्या बोल रहे हैं मोस्टली outside के बाहर देखते हैं तो अंदर
मेरा वाला सोच में मेरा पूरा फिजिक्स का है एक्सप्रेस है
वो ना एक्चुअली कैसे वो एक्सपेक्ट तो गलाने वाला ये नहीं बट इसका नाम सेक्स हुआ बड़ा क्रिएटिव अरे मेरे क्लास में तो ये हमारी सारा लेकिन मुझे कोड बस प्रोग्राम का टीचर है क्या नाम है नए बच्चे का इधर ही बैठा है नहीं बोला शुरू कर हाथ में चाहिए और मेरे भी कार्य किया धीरे धीरे वासी दोनों भी लोग इधर ही है डरता क्या
सीरियसली सैनली
कुछ शिराम विभाग में कोई पता है भाई कैसा है हाँ
Yeah, I just want you to leave
भाई उसको क्लियर कर दे भाई बॉक्स उसको बुलाए को ऑलरेडी है छुपाने के लिए बनाते रहता अबे तूने इसको बोला था अबे उनका बिहाव फिर उसने पूरा नाम दे दो बात करती भाई में नहीं करता ये भाई बस जुबानी से बात नहीं बात ये उसने किया इसके लिए लोग घर पर आना है क्या
अबे पहली बार सबके हाथ में फोन था भाई।
सिर्फ
मजा आता है भाई, ऐसा ही है।
लड़की को मिलने में मजा था देखो।
क्या सबसे ज्यादा लड़की में से लड़का है भाई। शिवा है लड़की को खोल रहा है।
सैल्यूट भाई। ब्राउन क्या करता है उसमें?
ये 02 सही है bro। चलेगा उसका अबे यार मैं तो सबको बोल रहा हूँ मेरे पास है फिर भी उसके नाम ना पुराना हो गया वो उससे क्या भी नहीं मुझे
सीधा चढ़ते
दे भाई साइन करेंगे
I don't want to say it, but
अरे तू भी नहीं करता लड़कियों से बात क्यों करता है बस वो भी एक दिन में कोई बात नहीं कर सुबह चटाई से बात किया तो अच्छी बात किसी ने किया हां ये बताया ना देख ले अल्लाह बाबा का नहीं गेम तो गेम से अट्टा लेकिन वो मेरे को एक ही लेगा नीचे उसका पता चलिए पैसा काफी बढ़ रहा है
Okay, so we now talk about the ventricles. I said commonly, if we have to talk about the function of a ventricle, what is a ventricle doing? The ventricle is always giving away blood to some body organs. नहीं चाहिए, एसी नहीं चाहिए, लाइट भी बंद कर दो। भी चले जाओ, तुम लोग भी घर जाओ आराम से, सो जाओ, कल जाके फ्रेंड चाहिए।
ये लोग दादागिरी करते हैं।
दादागिरी कौन तुम्हारे साथ दादागिरी करता है?
लड़कियां।
लड़कियां। और तुम दादागिरी सहते भी हो?
मैं साइंस
Now, when we are talking about ventricles, let us start now. The right ventricle, if I have to talk about the right ventricle has thinner walls. The right ventricle has thinner wall. So when I talk about the right ventricle has thinner wall as in comparison with the left ventricle, let us see here in the figure. So when I'm talking about the right ventricle, it has thin walls. वो concentrate कर. So the right ventricle has got thinner walls. And where is the right ventricle giving away blood to? Now let us try to understand that this right ventricle has got thin walls. And if I have to understand where will the blood by the way of the right ventricle go, the blood from the right ventricle will enter into the pulmonary artery to reach the lungs. So this would be the route of circulation from the right ventricle. Now, if comparative, I talk about the left, let us try to compare and then you will understand much better. When I talk about the left ventricle, from the figure itself, you understand. The wall of the left ventricle is very, very thick. The wall of the left ventricle is much thicker than the right ventricular wall. Yes or no? Now, what is the reason? The reason is when I'm talking about the left ventricle, I said this is about the right ventricle. Let us remember about the left ventricle now. The left ventricle has comparatively much thicker wall, but what will the right, or from where will the blood from the left ventricle will go where now? The blood from the left ventricle will go into the aorta and then into the body tissues. What is the difference? When I'm talking about the aorta one side and the pulmonary artery the other way, I'm saying that the blood which is here in the right ventricle is carried by the pulmonary artery. The blood which is present in the concentrate, both of you. I'm talking to you both. Now, when I'm talking about this, the right ventricle has got what type of blood you have already learned? Deoxygenated blood. And this blood is carried by the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery is a vessel, you're going to come again later, that this pulmonary artery arises from the upper regions of the right ventricle. This pulmonary artery carries what type of blood? Deoxygenated. Par kahan se kahan tak? From the right ventricle till the lungs. So ye jo right ventricle, I'm sorry, the pulmonary artery hai, this is a vessel which is actually connecting the heart and the lungs. Pulmonary artery is a vessel which is connecting the heart and the lungs. Pulmonary artery it is, but it is still carrying impure blood. But basically we understand when we have to write down the differences between the artery and the veins as the major vessels of our body, we always write artery should be carrying pure blood, oxygenated, and the vein should be carrying deoxygenated blood. So remember here, I'm talking about pulmonary artery as an exception. Being an artery, it is carrying impure blood, deoxygenated blood. Again, I repeat, kahan se kahan tak? From the heart to the lungs. Come to the other side. I talk about the left ventricle now. And the left ventricle is connecting which two parts? I'm sorry, the aorta is connecting which two parts? The heart and the tissues, body tissues. So this aorta that I talk about is the broadest, largest artery of the body. Artery, when I talk about, the broadest artery is the aorta, and vein, when I talk about, the broadest vein are the vena cava. We are just learned before the break, no? So when I talk about the aorta is the broadest artery, but kahan se shuru hota hai? It originates from the upper region of the left ventricle. So ventricle के upper region से, or if you say the other way, from the junction of the left auricle and left ventricle, the aorta emerges out. So the aorta emerges out from where? The aorta emerges out from the margin of the left auricle and the left ventricle. Say suppose if I now talk about, okay, now look at this particular figure also. If I talk about that, where is the aorta? This one is the aorta that I'm showing you. This one is the aorta. So aorta start kahan se hota hai? That is called emerging out. Start kahan se hota hai? It originates or emerges from this region actually. This region is actually the junction between the left auricle and the left ventricle. Talk about the pulmonary artery. Kahan se shuru ho raha hai? The pulmonary artery is starting from here. Either you write from the upper region of the right ventricle, or you write at the junction. It starts from the junction of the right auricle and the right ventricle. Both are correct.
Also, it would be near the
Near them, yes. So they are all starting almost from the roof of those ventricles. So these are the two vessels that I majorly talk about. And now the pulmonary artery, again I ask you, if I talk about the pulmonary artery, what type of blood does it carry? Deoxygenated. When you look into the figure also, by looking into the figure also, that should more or less get an impression here, that whenever I'm talking about these figures, the moment you see this blue indicates impure blood, and the moment you see the red indicates pure blood. Okay, so here again I come, difference between the right and the left ventricle. So I said right ventricle hai to kahan se kahan blood jayega, and now I talk about the left ventricle hai, then the left ventricle always carries pure blood. And which vessel will carry the pure blood? The aorta, which is the largest artery of the body. Aorta kahan se shuru hoga? From the left ventricle, and it will supply blood to the tissues. Will the aorta supply blood to the lungs? No, the aorta is not supplying the blood to the, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, is the aorta supplying blood to the lungs? Yes, to all the body tissues. It will supply blood to all the body tissues, even the heart wall itself. But this aorta will now divide into a large number of branches, which are called arteries. So here, something that we have to understand is that I talked about the pulmonary artery, which will carry blood from the heart. This pulmonary artery carries blood from the heart, which is impure. This impure blood goes to the lungs, and if I understand that the lungs is somewhere here, the lungs is very close to the heart, no? Now the lungs is somewhere here, and from the lungs, the pure blood is entering. By the way of the pulmonary veins, So already when we had talked about the auricle, we said, no, that by the way of the pulmonary veins, it enters, no? The pure blood. So this pure blood, but the lungs as an organ, should also get oxygen supply. So that will be carried out by some branches of the aorta. So now when we are talking about this basic scheme, right now, what are you supposed to understand? Some differences between the auricle and ventricle. Now, if I ask you, the right auricle and the left auricle, is there any difference between them so far the type of the blood is concerned? The right auricle and the left auricle, so far the type of the blood is concerned, is there any difference? Yes, who says no? Yes, deoxygenated, oxygenated blood. So far their wall thickness, is there any difference?
Yes.
This one and this one, not remarkably different, because the force of contraction here and the force of contraction here is almost the same, because they are driving the blood only to their next chambers. But now when I talk about these two, remarkably different. I'll show you the previous figure where you get to understand much better. So when I talk about this, see the wall thickness, remarkably different. If I talk about the wall thickness of the right auricle and the right ventricle, they are not remarkably different, almost the same. But when I talk about the wall thickness of the right ventricle and left ventricle, remarkably different. Here you get many questions on this. Why the wall of the right ventricle is much thinner? Or why is the wall of the left ventricle much thicker than this? Your answer is, here the force of contraction is milder because the blood has to go from here by the way of pulmonary vein only till the, pulmonary artery only till the lungs. And the heart and the lungs are nearby organs. So the force of contraction is mild. But what about this side? The force of contraction in the left ventricle has to be maximum. बहुत strong force of contraction होता है because the blood has to be driven by the way of the aorta to every particular region of the body, right from the brain till the tip of our toes. So think about the heart and our legs and our feet and our toes and our fingertips, so far away, no? These are the regions of the body far away. So if I have to talk about that, if our fingers, if our toes have to get an adequate supply of the blood, then obviously the left ventricle has to pump the blood with a greater force. So the blood will be rushing through the aorta and every single artery to reach our toes, to reach our brain, the layers of the brain that we have. So when we are talking about the aorta, the largest artery arising from left ventricle, pulmonary artery arising from right ventricle, and aorta arising from left ventricle. ये याद रखना है. So right now, let us write one question here. Again, I put a note at this, which you should take care when you study. Bolo.
From pulmonary veins, they join back into
Pulmonary veins, by the way of the pulmonary veins, the blood after getting oxygenated enters into the left auricle. But यहाँ पे एक और चीज मैं बता दूं. Now that I'm talking about the pulmonary artery, see here, I've written here, the pulmonary artery as it arises from the right ventricle, crosses the heart, and then it bifurcates into two big branches. One going to the right lung and the other going to the left lung. So ये तो हो गया pulmonary artery के दो branches, right pulmonary artery, left pulmonary artery. But जब lungs से आ रहा है, from the lungs, from every lung, there will be two pulmonary veins coming and entering. Two pulmonary veins coming and entering into the left auricle. So, agar two pulmonary veins per lung coming and entering, so how many pulmonary veins are taking blood into the left auricle? 4 pulmonary veins, 2 per lung. Aaya samajh mein? So in this figure also roughly you can see 2 here shown, but there are 2 from each side, 2 from this side. So yahan ke, when I talk about the right lung this side and the left lung this side, ultimately the blood will be poured into the left auricle. 2 pulmonary veins from the right lung, 2 pulmonary veins from the left lung, ultimately 4 pulmonary veins emptying the oxygenated blood into the left auricle. Aaya samajh mein? Now let us write this question. Why, or give reason. What is the reason that the left ventricular wall or the wall of the left ventricle is maximally thick? Write down. Give reason why. Give reason why the wall of the left ventricle is. The wall of the left ventricle is. Give reason why the wall of the left ventricle is much thicker than the right ventricle. The wall of the left ventricle is much thicker. The wall of the left ventricle is much thicker than the right ventricle. The wall of the left ventricle is much thicker than the right ventricle. Full stop. Go. The wall of the left ventricle is thick. To resist the maximum force of contraction. To resist the maximum force of contraction. To resist the maximum force of contraction. Which is necessary. which is necessary to throw the blood into the aorta, to reach, throw the blood into the aorta, maximum force of contraction, necessary to throw the blood into the aorta, throw the blood into the aorta, to reach distant parts of the body. You make it that way. To reach distant parts of the body. To reach distant parts of the body. To reach distant parts of the body. Full stop. But the force of contraction, next slide. But the force of contraction of the right ventricle is mild. The force of contraction of the right ventricle is mild and as it has to. Force of contraction of the right ventricle is mild as it has to throw the blood only till the lungs. As it has to throw blood only till the lungs. As it has to throw blood only till the lungs. Done?
Yes.
So this is one question that always you are asked. Next is, now that we talk about this particular region, this is what is known as the apex of the heart. So I told you what, I just now told you that whenever we are talking about the heart is actually, we generally say that the heart is in the chest cavity between the lungs, but actually it is tilted towards the left. It is tilted towards the left. So the heart actually has got a conical shape, no? The heart basically has got a conical shape and it is not placed straight in the chest cavity between the lungs, but it is tilted towards the left. So whenever we happen to put our fingers on the chest cavity, the lower side of the chest cavity, you can feel the pumping of the heart. You can sense the pumping of the heart. The same you cannot sense if you talk about the right side. No, on the lower side of the chest cavity, lower region of the chest cavity, when you touch, you can sense the testing, the pumping of the heart, but that we cannot do on the right side. Why like that? Because the maximum force of contraction is at the apex of the heart, and which is actually very close to the left ventricle. And just now you had written down that this is the part where the contraction force is maximum. So something like when we are talking about that, why is it possible? Why is it possible that when we talk about the maximum force of contraction is at the apex, the maximum force of contraction is at the apex of the heart, because it is very close to the left ventricle. And already you know that this particular region always contracts with the greatest force of contraction. So these are certain concepts to understand. Now next is, we try to come across some of the vessels and the valves of the heart. Now to understand the next concept, that is vessels and valves of the heart, what are some of the differences between the vessels and the valves? First of all, we talk about vessels. What are vessels? Vessels are tube-like structures connecting the body organs and the tissue. Connecting the body organs and the heart, lungs, all these three. So primarily we have to understand that if we have to talk about the vessels, which are some of the vessels of the body and which are those main vessels to come across. Now main vessels, first of all, let us learn the categories. What are some of the categories? Either we are talking about the pulmonary vein or the pulmonary artery or the aorta or the vena cava. We are majorly talking about arteries or veins. And to some extent, capillaries also. Now, when I talk about the vessel, the concept is something like this, that I talk about the heart first of all. The heart would give rise to aorta. What did I say? What about the aorta? One special feature about the aorta that you have to remember, it is the largest artery of the body. Now, this aorta will divide and divide to give rise to a large number of arteries. These arteries will further divide. Get acquainted with all these terms. Now, these arteries will further divide to give rise to finer tubes known as arterioles. These arterioles will further divide to give rise to the finest tubules or finest tubes, finest vessels, which are known as capillaries. Now, these capillaries are very close to the tissues. The capillaries are supplying blood to the tissues, and from the tissues, when the vessels are carrying blood away, now meaning I'm talking about these capillaries will run over the tissues and they will again unite this way and result in the formation of tubes again. And they will again result in the formation of tubes. So what are these tubes? Of course, these tubes are also capillaries. These tubes are also capillaries, but these are the capillaries which are coming away from the tissues. And these are the capillaries which are entering into the tissues, supplying blood to the tissues, carrying blood away from the tissues. So both the ends, the moment I talk about the word tissues, there are vessels supplying blood to the tissues. These are also capillaries. And when I talk about the vessels which are carrying blood away from the tissues, these are also first capillaries, then some other concepts. So now these capillaries would unite to give rise to what? They would first of all unite to give rise to venules. Then these venules, these capillaries will first of all unite to give rise to venules. Then venules, quite a number of them, will unite to give rise to veins. Then so many veins will give rise to the vena cava and vena cava. Now let us try understanding that this vena cava can be of two types. What are the two types? I talk about vena cava which can be superior vena cava, or superior vena cava is also known as the precaval. Superior vena cava known as precavals. And the other side we write inferior vena cava, and the inferior vena cava also known as what? Post-caval. They are also known as post-caval. And but then whatever it is, I talk about the superior or the inferior, they will pour their blood where? They will pour their blood where? Into the right auricle and then again back to the heart. So far the vessels are concerned, this many names you are supposed to understand, and their connections you are supposed to understand, their link you have to understand. So first of all, I say, what is the difference between the aorta and these veins or the vena cava? Can you tell me? What is the difference between these two? Can you tell me a basic difference between these two vessels? Aorta is carrying oxygenated blood and vena cava carrying deoxygenated blood. Ek aur difference?
Connects, vena cava connects to the right auricle, and aorta arises from the
left ventricle. ठीक है. एक और difference? एक और
aorta
difference?
supplies blood to all parts of the body.
हाँ.
Vena cava collects blood.
Collects blood. So इसमें से एक और concept हम सीखने वाले. This is the point that I was looking for. अभी now that we are talking about arteries and veins. Now you are talking about arteries and veins. Aorta is a big artery, vena cava is a big vein. So अभी major arteries and veins के बीच में there. Every second and every minute, the expression that you are showing, it's quite scary at times. मुझे तो कभी कभार पूछने में भी डर लग रहा है कि पूछूं कि नहीं पूछूं. What is going wrong there, Ryan, and this one? And now they don't know anything. So now that we are talking about vessels, what are vessels? Tube-like structures that connect the heart with the body organs, body tissues. Tube-like structures, what are blood vessels? Tube-like structures that connect heart to body tissues. तो अभी यहाँ पे सबसे पहले दो terms याद रखना ही है. Two words first of all. What are those two words? Aorta, vena cava. And now we try understanding if it is an artery. Aorta is an artery, big artery. If it is an artery, try to understand the term differences. After that, I'll ask you to write 5 differences on your own. Keep listening. The first one, What is the first difference I'm talking about? If it is an artery, it will carry blood from the heart to the body tissues. And if it is a vein, it will carry blood from the body tissues to the heart. Okay? What about the second difference? If it is an artery, it will carry oxygenated blood. And if it is a vein, it will carry deoxygenated blood. But exception कौन सा है? Pulmonary artery. Artery होने के बावजूद भी it must carry deoxygenated blood. And pulmonary vein है पर फिर भी oxygenated blood carry करता है. So that is the second point that we will do. Let us now talk about some structural differences also. I talk about the section of an artery. When you try to understand the section of an artery, you will always see that the wall is thicker. Okay, ये terms भी तुम्हें सीखना है. The wall is thick. Now the wall is thick, and the inner space, which is called the lumen, is thin. Narrow. So if I talk about the section of an artery, if I talk about the section of an artery and the section of a vein, the section of an artery, draw the artery this way, basic three layers that we talk about, and this basic three layers which are there, and the inner space is, what is it called? This is called as lumen. The inner space is called the lumen. And if this is an artery, then how should I draw the vein? If this is an artery, then how should I draw the vein? To draw the vein, I have to make it clear that yes, the three layers of course will be there, but then the three layers would be comparatively arranged in such a way, but the inner space has to be big and wide. The inner space is wide, the lumen is wide. So first, the third feature that I'm telling you is, so for an artery and a vein is concerned, the artery has got thick wall, narrow lumen. The vein has got thin wall, comparatively thin wall, and wide lumen. Relating to this, the fourth difference is, if the lumen is narrow, the pressure of the blood flowing in an artery is always higher. The pressure of the blood in an artery is always high. And since the space is so much, there is no need of no pressure developed in the fluid, whatever passes. I talk about a pipe, a water pipe, which is narrow, and the force of the water from the tap is the same. I talk about a water pipe. When I fit in that pipe, this is the water pipe that I fit into the nozzle of the tap. If it is narrow from inside, the inner space is narrow. Obviously, the water that will flow is at a much higher pressure. Quite a number of times they'll not be able to contain the water, to spill out, because the pressure is more, the space is less. But if I take a wider pipe, is there any reason that the water should spill out? First of all, spilling the hoga hi nahi, and the water will also run at a lower force, speed bhi kam hoga. Why? Because there is enough space for the fluid to run very slowly. So here I am talking about, since the wall is thick, lumen is narrow, pressure of the blood is high, fourth point. And here, wall is thin, lumen is broad, so the pressure of the blood is low pressure. The pressure of the blood is much lower. But if that is also the case, now listen to the fifth point that we have to understand. For the fifth point, now we are saying that if it is an artery, just now we learned that the artery is supplying blood from the heart to the body tissues. And basically, the artery is supplying blood from the heart mostly to parts of the body below the heart. If I talk about most of the body parts that we have is below the heart, except for the neck and the hands and the head. But most of the body parts below the heart. So obviously, the flow of the blood in an artery is much more faster, also because of the gravitational pull. But think about the blood which has to run from my toes till my heart. Is it that easy? Because the blood as it is flowing at a much lower force. Because wider lumen hai. Gravity, what about the gravitational pull? It is against the gravitational pull. So most of the time, yahi hota hai hamare body mein, ya hota shayad, that is what would have happened. If perhaps I talk about the vein which is running from my toe till my heart, and as the blood moves up, force is less, the blood will go down again. Moves up and go down again. Moves up and go down again. But does it actually happen this way? What I'm saying? No, not actually it happens. So अगर यही अगर होता कि every time the blood is rising up again it falls. क्यों? क्योंकि force इतना कम है, pressure इतना कम है. Pressure should be there. So say suppose I talk about the water tank which we have something on the ground floor, and if I'm staying on the 11th floor, unless and until the pressure is that high, then the water run up there. No, the water will not go up there. So abhi same is the situation I am talking about. My feet and my toes. Yahan se is the deoxygenated blood reaching the heart every day, every moment? Yes. But again, I am saying that the lumen jo hai, this lumen is so wide. प्रेशर तो बन ही नहीं सकता है वेन में, तो प्रेशर अगर इतना बन ही नहीं सकता है, then how is the blood rising up so high? Because of some special structure that the vein has. Because of some special structures that the vein has. So every time when the blood is in the process of movement, I talk about this is my vein, and if these are the toes that I'm talking about, and this is the heart that I'm talking about, all throughout there are some muscular flaps which can contract and relax. Which can contract and relax. And these muscular flaps are almost like pockets, if I draw it more perfectly. These are almost like pockets, these are almost like pockets, okay? So now, when I try showing you that these are almost like pockets, so what happens? Now that a small amount of blood starts rising up, never mind the pressure is less, a small amount of blood rises up, and the blood is filling up here, the blood is filling up in these pockets. As the blood is filling up in this pocket, the walls of these pockets, they start expanding and widening, resulting in the closure progressively, So whatever amount of blood has already come up, can they flow back? No, they cannot. They cannot. So what are these pockets or these muscular flaps called? These are known as valves. Sometimes there may be valves with 2 pockets. Sometimes there may be valves with 3 pockets. Okay. So now, as in when I said just now that when the blood is now in the process of rising up, yes, small amount of blood has gone up. They will remain. And in the next time again when the valve little bit opens up, by the time this blood must have been already pushed because of our body movements, and some amount of blood again enters. So when we are talking about, it is not generally the condition where we understand that whatever amount of blood has gone up, all will fall down. Little bit will come down, but again they will be forced up. Little bit may come down, but again they will be forced up maximally because of the presence of this valve constantly all throughout the length or the entire structure of the veins. What I'm supposed to write is, what is the significance of this valve? The valves actually prevent the backflow of the blood. They prevent the backflow. They don't allow the blood to fall back. If the blood would have been falling back every time, then the blood reaching from the toes to the heart would have taken a couple of days perhaps. It would have been very difficult. And if that also would have happened, then every time our legs and our toes getting oxygenated blood would have been so difficult. Because unless and until the heart is filled with blood, pumping in the heart kaise nahi ho sakta na. So that is how our body is built up. See here, when we are talking about that your valves jo hai, they always prevent the backflow. So right now, remember the 5 points that I told you, you will write them down. Then you will have to draw this diagram. It's very important. Surely you get this type of diagram-based questions. In some way or the other, always you get. Now, what happened? Who is sleeping? You or the monitor? So now, when I talk about 5 differences, make a column in your notebook. 5 differences here, I told you first difference is about the blood area from the first difference I told you about the direction. You will start writing now.
I'm mentioning
Mentioning the exception is very, very important. So now I told you, write up the first difference. First of all, you will write down based on direction of blood flow. First difference based on direction of blood flow. Second difference you will write on type of blood that they carry. Type of blood that they carry. Third difference you are going to write on the wall and lumen. Fourth difference you are going to write about their pressure. Keep writing. So the first point, direction of blood flow. क्या लिखोगे? Aorta नहीं लिखो, arteries. I am basically asking you to write down differences between arteries and veins. Aorta and vena cava are the major ones. So you are writing differences between artery and vein. You are writing differences between artery and veins. The first difference, arteries and veins, with reference to aorta, that you have to remember. Difference between arteries and veins. The first difference, arteries carry blood from the heart to the tissues. Veins carry blood from the tissues to the heart. Likho. Veins carry blood from the tissues to the heart. Understand and write. Understand and write. Veins carry blood from the tissues to the heart. Second difference. Second difference, write about the type of the blood. Second difference, write about the type of the blood. Type of the blood. Second point में क्या लिखना है? Type of the blood. Arteries carry oxygenated blood. Exception is pulmonary artery. Now description of the pulmonary artery, no need. Just that much. The exception is pulmonary artery. Complete that point. Done. Third point. For the third point, arteries have thick walls and narrow lumen. On the other side, veins have thin walls and wide lumen. Thick walls. Diagram देख के याद रखना है. Thick walls and narrow lumen. Thick walls and narrow lumen. And veins have thin walls and wide lumen. What about the next? Four. Point number 4 on pressure you write. For arteries, what are you supposed to write? Blood flows at a very high pressure. Blood flows at a very high pressure. Blood flows at a very high pressure. Vein. Blood flows at a low pressure. Blood flows at a low pressure. And now the fifth point that you write is valves. On the valves you write. For arteries, do not possess valves. Veins possesses valves. Now, this diagram that I'm talking about is very common to get in the paper, and you will always be asked, label the parts 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, something like that. You are not to label them as most of the time students would label it this way. Outer layer, middle layer, inner layer. It is there in your book. It is written in your book. Outer layer, middle layer, inner layer. But that is not the answer that we are looking for. You're not supposed to write. वैसे तो outer layer, middle layer, inner layer अगर लिखना ही है, so if I give this paper to the second standard or third standard के बच्चे भी लिख सकते हैं ना, outer, inner, मुझे तो उनको भी समझ में आता. But you are supposed to write down the correct names or composition majorly. So this is what actually the proper answer that we are looking for that we should write. But
After the smooth muscle and elastic fibers, you can write one.
नहीं, वैसे तो either you write this way, which is the most acceptable way. This is what we are looking for, that is it right. अच्छा, अगर याद नहीं है, then all the three you have to write the same way, right? Tunica go, tunica externa, and then media and intima. So that way you write. But try remembering this way. Try remembering this way, the composition. Endothelium. Endothelium, which is actually the innermost layer. Endothelium, made up of epithelial tissues, that is. Epithelial tissues. Oh no.
What is the third tunica?
Intima. Interna या तो intima. हमारे बुक में क्या दिया है? Interna है. हाँ, interna या तो intima. Both are correct. So either you write intima. Intima is also there. या तो interna. Now we talk about the valves. What are valves? Which type of valves arising from where? Now, as I talk about the valves, here, 4 important valves you are supposed to study. Which are the 4 important valves? Consider diagrams. हाँ, 4. तुमको जाना है अभी? हाँ, tricuspid, bicuspid or semilunar. Both are semilunar here that you understand. Okay, so let us see. The first is the tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve. When we are talking about the tricuspid valve, the location and the significance, the function. So we are talking about the tricuspid valve as one. We are talking about the bicuspid valve as the other. And we are talking about the pulmonary semilunar. We are talking about the pulmonary semilunar. And we are talking about the aortic semilunar. Okay. So now these 4 valves, let us see what are their respective roles and where do they arise, from where do they arise. Keep looking into the figure also so that you understand much better. Let me just show you from the figure first. So when we are talking about the valves, let us see again. Okay. I forgot one concept here. There go. Now already we had been talking about the arteries and veins, no, their structural aspect, their functions. What about the capillaries? We have been just now understanding that the capillaries are the finest tube-like structures. If I talk about a capillary which is going towards the tissue, what type of blood it carries? Oxygen. And if I talk about a capillary which is coming away from a tissue, what type of blood it carries? The oxygen. So now, with that reference, if I'm talking about name the blood vessel which carries oxygenated blood towards a tissue and deoxygenated blood away from a tissue. Which blood vessel? Capillaries, no? Capillaries. So it is like capillaries. I again tell you, some of you seem not to understand this. What I'm saying is, I talk about some tissues. So on one side of the tissue, I understand that this vessel must have divided into a large number of fine tube-like structures. So what do you call these as? These are capillaries. But at the same time, you may also come across that this may again unite together to result in the formation of another vessel. So what is this vessel? This is an artery and these are capillaries. But at the same time, if I talk about this, these are capillaries, but why do I say these are veins? Because it is the blood which is coming out from a tissue and it is the blood which is entering into a tissue. Is this understood? So when I talk about the blood vessels which supply blood to the tissues, at the same time carry blood away from the tissues, the word is capillaries. Abhi capillaries ki jo section hai, if I have to draw the section of a capillary, how do I draw? Very small. The diameter is much lesser than 1 millimeter also. The diameter is lesser than 1 millimeter. And can I draw a number of walls here? No, they are single cell thickness. They just have got a single wall thickness. Yeah. So when I talk about the capillaries, they have got a single layer epithelial cells. Single layer epithelial cells. And that is the reason why the process of diffusion is possible only at the level of capillaries, not at the level of an artery or a vein. When the blood is flowing in an artery and a vein, is the process of diffusion of nutrients, gases, anything possible? No, because there are so many layers. Process of diffusion not possible. But if I talk about oxygen or carbon dioxide, anything, I understand yes, the process of diffusion is possible because of the single layered epithelial wall. Next, I'm talking about the word valve, and here we try understanding the 4 valves and their respective functions. Dekho, yahan pe look at this figure. If I talk about this particular structure, let us start with the first one. I talk about the first one, that is a tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve. Now, this tricuspid valve, what is its location? Where is this tricuspid valve? On the right side or the left side of the heart? On the right side of the heart. Between right atrium and right auricle and right ventricle. Between the right auricle and right ventricle, this particular valve is present. Between the right auricle and right ventricle. What are these valves made up of, I say? Muscles. So now, are they capable of undergoing the process of contraction, relaxation? Yes. So now, if I talk about that, it is between the right auricle and the right ventricle. Try understanding that when this chamber, the right auricle, fills with blood, how will it fill with blood? When the vena cava drops the blood, pours the blood. So when I talk about this right auricle, when it becomes filled with blood, distended with blood, what do we call this? That the heart wall is maximally expanded. Then I would say that this would be a condition where the right auricle is showing expansion of the walls to fill the blood, and this is what is known as diastole. Diastole of the heart wall or diastole of the heart chamber means what? It is dilating to fill in blood, but till a limit. After that, what will happen? Now, when it is filling blood, these valves are closed. When the right auricle is filling blood, the tricuspid valves are closed. After some time, when the right auricle is fully filled with blood, slowly, the valves open up. The valves are contracting and opening up and make a pathway, and the blood now starts running down. The blood now starts pouring down. The blood is now completely in a pathway to enter into the right ventricle. The blood is now entering into the right ventricle. Now when the blood is entering into the right ventricle, which chamber is expanding? This is expanding and this is contracting. So this diastole will be followed by what? Systole. And what do you understand by this word systole? Contraction of the heart wall. So every time for any particular chamber, whether now I started with right auricle. So first of all, the right auricle will undergo diastole, followed by systole. So when the right auricle is undergoing systole, the right ventricle is undergoing diastole. जब ये खाली होगा तो ये भरेगा ना. And now to fill up a muscular structure, it can expand. So now that it is expanding and filling up the blood to a limit, now that it is expanding, what is this phase of the heart known as diastole? And now that it is contracting and squeezing to push the blood, what is this phase known as systole? So diastole and systole, and this goes on in a cyclical manner. So first of all, I said that when this will contract and push the blood here, so which valves should contract and open? It is the tricuspid valve. The tricuspid valve contracts and opens up so the blood can flow down. Let us come to the next phase. Now this is in a diastole phase, diastolic phase, meaning it is filling up blood, it is expanding. Again, it has a limit. So after some time, what should happen? This blood should find a way. After some time, this blood should find a way. So by the time this is filled up, ये जो valve है, जो tricuspid थोड़ा देर पहले जो contract होके, it has opened up, slowly it will start closing down again, expansion होके it will again close. So now it is closed, and ये जो blood है, that is the reason it will not backflow. So जैसे ये considerable amount of, again, are you to understand that this auricle gets empty till the last drop? No, a considerable amount of blood will come down, and slowly this closes down, and now this blood has to find its way. So by that time, when this fills, another valve, which valve I'm now talking about? The pulmonary semilunar. Now why am I talking about the pulmonary semilunar? Because the connection between the right ventricle and pulmonary artery, already we have understood that the right ventricle, is it connected with the left ventricle? The right auricle, left auricle? No, it is only connected to the pulmonary artery. The right ventricle is only and only connected to which vessel? Pulmonary artery. So there's a gateway, there's a valve between the pulmonary artery and the right ventricle. Which is that valve? Pulmonary semilunar. What is the name? Pulmonary semilunar valve. So this pulmonary semilunar valve, when this fills up, opens up. Opening is always by contraction. So ये जो valve है, pulmonary semilunar valve, contract होके छोटा हो जाएगा and then open up a little bit, and now the blood will rush into the pulmonary artery. The nature of the blood in the pulmonary artery, you know already. What is the nature of the blood that the pulmonary artery is gathering now? Deoxygenated. Very good. Now the blood is deoxygenated, and where will the blood go? Lungs. By the way of the right and the left branch, it goes to the lungs. And lungs में oxygenation होगा, and after that from the lungs, again by the way of the pulmonary veins, what type of blood is coming back? Oxygenated and getting dropped into the left auricle. So at a time, 4 pulmonary veins carry blood into the left auricle. The nature of the blood is oxygenated. This blood, the moment it is now getting filled up, when it is filling up, what is the phase of the heart called? Diastole. Diastole of the auricles I'm talking about. So now this left auricle is filling up blood. When the left auricle is almost filled with blood, which vessel is supposed to open, which valve is supposed to open? Now the bicuspid will open. I'll just take 1 more minute to finish up. Bicuspid opens and the blood fills up here, fills up here, fills up here. Now, as this is almost filled up, which valve for the last, what is the last stage here? This is connected to which vessel? Aorta. This is connected to the aorta. This is connected to the aorta. So when this has to contract, the blood has to enter into the aorta. So which valve will open up now? The aortic semilunar opens up and the blood enters into the aorta. This is what we are going to learn as double circulation. Again, I'll continue on this tomorrow.
Yes, sir, maybe. अबे जाना है तो एक बोले जाना है कि नहीं पूछ लिया मुझे आपने को बोला पर जरूरी होता है सारी ये कैसे करते थे ये कितना भी सब कुछ का लगता है अबे